Hey there, it's Melissa Brunetti, and welcome to the Mind Your Own Karma podcast. Hey there, Karma crew. Thanks for listening to this episode of Mind Your Own Karma Beyond the Bandage. If this episode caught your attention, here's what I already know about you. You're capable, you handle a lot, and people count on you, but your nervous system has learned that staying effective means staying on edge. You might not call it burnout, but you feel the constant tension, the quick reactions, and the mental load that never really shuts off. Today's conversation is about how survival mode shows up in everyday life, not just in teams or leadership roles, but in your body, your relationships, and the way you make decisions under pressure. This isn't about fixing yourself or becoming someone new. It's about understanding what your nervous system learned and how it can learn something different. My guest is Mitchell Weisburgh, who works with leaders and groups to help them shift out of reactivity and into calmer, more resourceful ways of responding. And we're translating that work into what it means for you as an individual navigating stress, conflict, and responsibility. It's time to rip off the bandage and dive in because this episode might just change your life. We are welcoming Mitch Weisburgh to the show today. Hi, Mitch.
Hi, how are you, Melissa?
I'm great. I'm so glad you're on the show. We finally got you on. Before we dive in, can you give us a sense of who you are and the work that you do, and what first made you realize that this was something that you needed to understand more deeply?
Okay, well, my name is Mitch Weisberg. I'm here in the New York City area, and I've been working on mind shifting since around 2017, 2018. I look at mind shifting as having three different components. One component is resourcefulness, and we can get into that later if you want, but resourcefulness, resilience, and collaboration are the three components that I deal with. And I guess, there's so many different things that were happening in 2016, 2017. On the one hand, I'd been working in education for around 16 years and looking around, and it's like I got into education because I felt technology was a way to give all kids a chance at living great lives. It could really transform education. And I look around 15 years later, and kids still weren't prepared to be adults. And it's like, so it's not really technology. Let me take a look around a little bit more. And then at the same time, with during the election of 2016, the inauguration of 2017, we're filled with so much hate as a society, and it's like, there are better ways of doing this. So I said, I want to put together materials that show people a way out to be able to live great lives.
Mm.
And I got an opportunity and roped myself into teaching a course, a 2-day workshop for college kids. And in researching all the information for that course, I went into all the different ways that we coach people, or make decisions like economics, psychology, cognitive science, neuroscience, military strategy, coaching, teaching, sales, what I tried to do is pull all that information together. That's how I came up with those three different strands, taught the class, and at the end of the 2 days, the kids stood up and cheered. And
Wow.
so that basically says to me, something, these are skills nobody's teaching people. People understand that they can learn them. They're teachable. And from that point on, I transitioned from, primarily working with education publishers to working on mind shifting full time. And so that's what I do. And that's how I got into it.
Yeah. So you use the phrase emotional survival mode. What does that actually look like for someone that's a high functioning leader, like in their everyday life? What does that look like?
Well, so our brains. So this is an oversimplification. You understand that, right? It's
Yeah.
the brain is probably the most intricate organism in the universe. Like
Yeah.
it's very complex. But you could basically look at it as having two modes of operating. One is survival mode, and the other is uh, curious and or playful mode. And that survival mode basically goes into operation as soon as there's some type of event that happens that we pick up through our senses. And within, a couple hundredths of a second, it says, "Oh, this might be a threat. Oh, this is what we should do." And and then once it's picked up that what we should do, unless you have the ability of self-awareness, of metacognition to understand what's happening, you're locked into that, and then you're not able to then reassess. And so when you say, "Oh, this is too hard, I can't do this," or "This person is criticizing me," or "This is the way to do something," as soon as you're sure, that's a sign that you're in your survival mode. That's your limbic part of the brain telling you it's either right or it's wrong. You're right, they're wrong. On the other part of the brain where we're curious, where we're trying to be empathetic, where we're critically thinking, and where we're creative. I mean, that part of the brain actually wakes up in a couple seconds after a stimulus. And so you can use that to become aware and say, wait a minute, that was a limbic reaction. I don't have to do that. But leaders, all of us, as any person, immediately goes into that survival mode where there's really five different types of actions that we take. We get locked into those, and then we shut down our prefrontal cortex, which is where we're creative, critically thinking, taking in new information, doing executive function.
Yeah. I love anyone who listens to this show on a regular basis knows my favorite word is curiosity. And I feel like that's where things shift from survival mode is when you start getting curious instead of reacting.
Yeah, and that can happen automatically. It can be that you just realize, oh my gosh, I was in limbic mode. I don't have to do that. Let me be curious about this. But
Yeah.
sometimes things are they're tougher than that, and sometimes you can open yourself up by internal dialogue. So you could say, if you're sure that you can't do something, you could say to yourself, well, what if I could? And just what if I could?
Mm,
Then could get your brain to start thinking of ways that you could. Doesn't mean that you can, or you could have been right, you can't do it.
yeah.
But questions that open us up is a second way of getting into curiosity mode. And then the third way is some type of distraction or focus on something else. So you could take a walk, you could take a deep breath, you could count to 10, you could do mindfulness.
Yeah.
Any of those things can put you in a mode where you quiet that limbic brain. You allow your system to flush out all the stress hormones, which is limiting you. And that takes like 60 to 90 seconds for the brain to be able to do that. And then once you're in a calmer mode, then you can use your positive self-talk or your opening up questions to get curious, empathetic, creative, critically thinking, look for new information, etc.
Yeah, I think once we realize that we have more power than we think we do, and that there's some simple little tricks that we can do to shift things a lot of times, we just give our power away to our emotions and feelings and kind of just, go with that instead of realizing that we really do have a choice and some power over some of this.
Yeah, and I think one of the things is that when you're in blame mode, that's a sure sign that it's that limbic system and you've given up your power. And with
Mm,
blame mode could be you could be blaming yourself, like if I wasn't so stupid or if I wasn't so weak. It could be blaming another person, if she wasn't so mean or if he wasn't so controlling,
yeah.
or it could be the situations like, something, these things always happen to me. I don't know why, but or I just had bad luck this time. So whatever it is, when you're in blame mode, it's like, aha, you're in limbic. First, you got to get out of limbic before you can be curious and access your prefrontal cortex.
Yeah. And what a great opportunity to turn inward and look at yourself.
Yep.
And, instead of blaming out, outwardly, yeah, great opportunity there. Many people think that survival mode only shows up during a crisis. How does it quietly drive everyday leadership behaviors like you were talking about control,
Yep.
agency, people pleasing, and withdrawal?
That's a really interesting question. And you're right, because people think, oh, survival mode, that's fight, flight, freeze, right? And those are the three things that we associate with survival mode. So I have a broader definition of it than that. Anytime it's our our limbic part of our brain that's determining what we should do. I call that using the survival parts of the brain. And
Mm,
that part of the brain, of course, fight, flight, freeze are three of the ways that it works, but there are two others as well. One is the things that we already know how to do, the things that we're fluent in. So, so our limbic brain is basically what's activating when we're walking, because we're not thinking about that we're walking. The
yeah.
limbic brain is what immediately reacts when somebody says something, and we feel that we should tell them why they're wrong. That's not necessarily fight, flight, freeze. It's like, well, they just said something wrong. I'm gonna tell them why they're wrong. So that's the limbic reaction of doing something that we already know how to do well. And then the fifth type of limbic reaction is copying the people around us. And
Mm,
so when we're with a group of people, or um, we're in a family group or a political party, or whatever, it's like these people are older. These other kids are harassing this one kid, but they're bullying them, so it can't be that bad. I'm going to go along with them. These people are acting in a certain way, so I guess I'll do that too. The group expects me to react in a certain way, and I'm gonna react according to what the group. So those are those things, and we do those as leaders. We retreat back to the things that we know well. So you're running a meeting, and somebody in the meeting raises something that's counter to a point that you already brought up, and so your immediate reaction, if this is what you've done all the time, is to say, well, you know something, that's really wrong. Let's move on, or whatever your immediate reaction is. You're reacting in a way that is comfortable to you, but you're not curious. The
yeah.
curious way is saying, wait a minute, this person brought up something, you know, they're probably wrong, but what if they were 10% right? If they were 10% right, what could I learn from them?
Mm, yeah. I think that belonging is so strong a lot of times that it overshadows our authenticity and um, makes us not even think about what we really believe, in the process of wanting to belong and wanting to fit in.
And those groups, they suck us in because the first time that we go against something that we really think, then that reinforces that type of thought process, or it
Mm,
reinforces that behavior. And then the next step is a little bit further, and the next step is a little bit further. And we don't even realize it. It's like,
yeah.
that frog reacting to water that's slowly getting warmer, right? And
Yeah.
then all of a sudden, we're acting in ways that if we really stop to think about it, it's like, I wouldn't normally be this mean to these people, or I wouldn't normally condone this behavior.
Yeah. Now, you emphasize that resilience, creativity, and collaboration are trainable and not personality traits. So, what does training the brain actually mean? And is it different from mindset work?
Well, yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't really thought of it that way before, but um, you know, everything that we do begins in our brain, in our mindset. So I think that resourcefulness, resilience, and knowing how to work with other people, conflict and collaboration, they all do result from mindsets. And so I guess technically, if you learned that first stage and you really, really learn that, that would carry forward into the other two, because that resourcefulness is the ability to be able to get out of your limbic brain and into the resourceful parts of your brain, so you can be, empathetic, you can look at new information, you can be creative, you can align what you're doing to your higher values, and you can stick with something even if it starts going wrong. The resilient part um, is how we react to situations. So it still is, if you think about it, the brain, right? It still is the mindset.
Hmm.
But we tend to look at situations and think there's one right answer. And then once we have it, or once we figure out how to get it, it's like, I'm going to, do this. Anybody who comes up with a different answer is wrong, and I'm going to do this, and it's going to fix the problem. And then when it doesn't fix the problem, or people start disagreeing, or when you find out that that may not be the right answer, all of a sudden we go into this blame mode, and we think that all we have to do is just be more just have more grit. Just force yourself to do it. Um, but um, but if you train yourself to recognize that there are different types of situations, and some of them really do have one right answer, but some of them have multiple right answers that need a diversity of ways of looking at the information in order to come up with something that will work. But whatever you come up with is only a matter of trading off other things that could work also. So if you wanted to, if you're looking to build a house, there's no one right house. If you describe what you wanted to five different architects, you're going to get five different houses. Now, any of them are going to be a house that you could live with, probably, if the architects knew what they were doing. But each one is going to have trade-offs, and you could, pull a little bit from this architect, pull a little bit from that architect. But it's not like there's one right answer. And then there are some things that they're new, and most things really involving people are like this, where nobody really knows what the right answer is. And so in those things where things are complex and nobody really knows the answer, then what you want to do is you want to be able to come back and say, you know something, nobody really knows what to do. What are some things that we could try? What do I think is going to happen if I try them? Which one do I want to try now? Let me try it, look at the results, and then figure out what to do next. So you're doing things not with the expectation that they're going to win or lose. You're doing things with the expectation that they're going to give you information back. And so that's the trainable with the resilience, and then the trainable with conflict. There's just so many aspects of it. One is, an awful lot of people think, well, conflict is bad. I just want to avoid
Mm,
conflict. And so to understand that some conflicts really end up resulting in stronger bonds between people. They end up creating stronger, better solutions
yeah.
than either side could have had. So that's one. That to understand that there are really five different styles of dealing with conflicts, and to understand what style you generally gravitate towards, but learning how to try those other styles, learning communications techniques such as using, our inclination is to, when somebody does something wrong, is to criticize them and tell them what they did wrong, but learning, say, strength-based feedback instead of immediately going to criticism, learning communications methods like motivational interviewing, where you're asking open questions and you're not reacting to the a person doing something wrong. You're encouraging them to think through what they did and what they really want to do and come up with alternatives. And then nonviolent communication, where you're proposing people do things, but you're doing it in a fashion that doesn't elicit a conflict response. So
Yeah.
those are all trainable.
What if your response is to avoid conflict?
Well, so that's one of the five styles. And so my wife, and this is going back probably 25 years ago, she took the conflict resolution test, conflict styles test, and she got, when she came back, she says, "Wow," she says, "all this time I looked at you and I thought you were just being lazy because you kept on avoiding things. But what we learned is that sometimes avoid can be very valuable
Mm,
because sometimes problems just they're going to solve by themselves. Okay, sometimes you're better off if somebody does something wrong, let them live with the natural law of consequences, and learn rather than intervene and do it the right way. Sometimes you're better off postponing while people are too hot so that they can cool off or you can cool off and then do it later. But if you're avoiding because you're fearful, if you're, like, oh, I better not do anything because I'm going to screw it up. Better not do
mm,
anything because she's going to yell at me. I better not do anything or he's not going to like me. Um, then your avoid is coming from your limbic mind, your survival mind, and in that case, it's better to just kind of come back and say, well, what if I approach this a little bit differently? What are some other approaches? And it could be that avoid was the right thing all along, but avoid should be done from the standpoint of something that seems like the best thing to do rather than fear.
yeah. That's a good, that almost, I think, answers this next question. I was going to ask, some people say I do that just because that's how I am. That's how I am, rather than maybe something that their nervous system learned.
Yeah, and so this applies to people, but it also applies to organizations. And the data shows that when three alternatives that could work are considered, decision making and results are substantially improved.
Mm,
And most of us, and most decisions, like 70% of decisions in organizations, end up only going with the first thing that comes up. And so if we want to be better, then we should be stopping and saying, okay, this is what I think I should do. If I couldn't do that, what else could I do? Or what are two other things that I think might be able to work? And then consider what to do next rather than just picking, oh, this is the way I always do this.
yeah. So you talked about motivational interviewing a little bit earlier. At a high level, what shifts when leaders stop trying to fix or persuade and start actually listening for the values instead?
Well, it takes longer.
Mm,
So that's the negative, is that if there's something that absolutely has to be done, then okay, maybe motivational interviewing and the types of questioning, you don't have time for it. But if you're thinking like, I just want to get this over and I'm going to tell them what to do, when you're doing that, you're also triggering in the other person a mode of resentment.
mm,
And you're likely to get somebody who is compliant while you're watching and not compliant when you're not watching.
yeah.
Um, and so, approaching things from a questioning standpoint, what you're doing is, most people, they want to do the right thing. And if what they're doing hasn't been working or what they're doing is not going to work, they'll eventually see it. And if you can get them to see it themselves, then they're going to be much more committed to going ahead and doing it. And so we're all ambivalent about certain things that we do. Maybe we know that maybe we have cognitive dissonance. Maybe we know that they're wrong, but we're justifying it. And it's asking us the questions to see if what we're doing really aligns with what we really, really want.
Mm. How do you help people that want that quick fix? How do you help them get real momentum without feeling falling into that quick fix, mentality?
So it's not. So I'm not. I don't professionally coach people. I don't have people coming to me where I sit down with them and say, okay, now we're going to work. Now we're going to coach on how to convince people. So I do
Mm,
it through my courses, which mostly I'm mostly teaching teachers and the books, but it's I in the books I do it through describing what motivational interviewing is, showing what happens to somebody when we don't use motivational interviewing and what's going on in their head, and through a lot of examples of conversations that take place where here's what you would do if you were not using motivational interviewing. How do you think this person reacted? Here's an example of motivational interviewing. And then what I suggest to people is that once they understand how to use it, is that when they know that they're going to get into a situation where they're going to be discussing something, trying to convince somebody of something, go on their computer, go into one of the AI bots and type in, okay, here's the situation. If I were going to use motivational interviewing and this person was initially defensive, show me a conversation that would result. And
mm,
so that gives you a model, and it's incredible what comes. It's like people will look at that and say, "My gosh, I was just going to tell this person what was wrong," but I can see now that this type of questioning just opened them up, and they came up with something that they could do, and were a lot more committed than if I just merely told them what to do.
yeah, interesting. So from a brain and nervous system perspective, what actually changes when someone's doing this work consistently and how do they know that it's working?
How do they know that it's working? Well, going back to what happens in their brain uh, is when you're operating from what I call the sage brain, the resourceful part of the brain, your brain is being flooded with happy hormones. So
Hmm.
you're happier and you're more productive when you're operating this way. You have,
Okay.
dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, the endorphins. I mean, those hormones are kind of flooding your brain. It's like, wow, I'm really enjoying this. And while they're doing it, they're amplifying the work that your prefrontal cortex is doing. So your prefrontal cortex is like really enjoying the problem solving. You might, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi called this state flow. Like you're
Mm.
doing something, you're not even aware how much time or effort it is
Yes.
because it's so enjoyable and so
Yeah.
engrossing. So that's what's happening internally. What you know, life and situations are so complex. So it's not like you can say, if you do this, this is going to be the result. What you can see is that if you're doing that, people are more open, people are more motivated, and people are more committed when they're around you, while
Yeah.
you're also having a better time.
Mm. Yeah. No, that makes sense. But so say you're working in a team, because that can be pretty challenging,
Mhm.
especially when you've got strong personalities and, people want to take control of the group and start competing in the room. What happens or what helps a group move out of survival driven power struggle and into real collaboration?
I think that when groups can understand in advance that there are four different types of situations. And so when they discuss that and they understand there are simple situations where there's one right answer, there's complicated situations where you might need expertise, data, or analysis, and there's probably more than one solution, that there's complex situations where nobody knows the solution and the idea is to try things, and then there are urgent situations where we actually have to do something to get safe. And so once they understand that there's those four different types of situations, then some of the arguments in groups just go away because it's no longer like, I'm right. No, I'm right. No, I'm right. It's like, something, this is a complicated situation and there could be, it's just a matter of trade-offs. And the most important thing in a complicated situation is that once you've chosen something, everybody becomes on board. Or if it's a complex situation, it's like, well, something, we don't know what's going to work. So nobody's going to, we can't just go to an expert and say, do this, because they're going to say, oh, this is a nail. I have a hammer for every situation. We have to come up with different things that we can try, and let's just figure that out. And so a lot of those problems then evaporate.
Mm,
When you really look at situations as if they're one of four, and you understand it's a complex or a complicated situation.
yeah. So for listeners who already are successful but feel chronically tired and taxed, what's a meaningful first step that they could take this week to interrupt reactivity?
Um, what's a meaningful first step that they could take right now? I mean, other than reading one of my books, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
something. Just is there like a tip, breathing technique or something, mindset shift?
Well, certainly when you're feeling stuck and tired, a certain amount of that is because you're in your limbic brain.
Mm,
And so again, there's three things that you can do to get out of your limbic brain. First of all, if sometimes just realizing it, something, I'm feeling stuck because that's my limbic brain, but
yeah.
I don't have to be there. Sometimes just saying like, okay, I'm stuck, but what are some things that I could do that are different? Or sometimes like, well, something, let me go out for a run. Let me listen to some music and quiet down, and then let me ask myself, are there other things to do? And so
Mm,
those are the three things that we could do ourselves. And then the
okay.
fourth thing is somebody who is aware of what it's like to be in survival mode or not survival mode is to talk to another person. So if they knew you and they felt stuck, we could say, okay, something, this is a time for me to call Melissa and get some coaching to calm me down and open up my mind.
Yeah, good tips there. And you talked about your books. You've written more than one on mind
Right.
shifting. Kind of walk us through what each one of those is about.
So there will be three books, okay? One on resourcefulness, one on resilience, and one on conflict and collaboration. The one on resourcefulness came out last year. That's Stop Your Brain from Sabotaging Your Happiness and Success.
Mm,
And then while I was writing that book and teaching the courses, the course that had the most impact on people was the conflict and collaboration course, because people just felt, everything is so divisive. And as soon as they got into the course, they were like, oh, now I understand. Here's how I can handle these things.
Mm.
And so it just seemed to me that that needed to be the next book that I wrote. But it's the third course. So I now have volume one and volume three of mind shifting. Volume three is just, mind shifting, conflict and collaboration. And I teach the second course also, but I haven't started writing that book. But once I start writing the book, it's about 9 to 12 months before the book comes out. So those are the two books, and they're basically on Amazon.
Great. We'll have those links in the show notes. As you look ahead, what kind of ripple effect do you hope that your work creates?
So there's two answers to that because it's a really interesting question. So the one answer, the small answer, is that I hear from people who've taken the courses, or I see from reflections and talking to them, and I hear from people who have read the books, like, "Oh my gosh, this has changed my life.
Mm.
This is what I used to do. This is how I used to feel. This is what I used to think." And now all of a sudden it opened up and these barriers have washed away. So, even if I reach, 20 people or 100 people or, that mean like I know individual people I'm having that effect with, and they're having that effect on others. But my overall goal, which is the second answer, is, there's 5 billion people on the planet, 7 billion people on the planet. What if we had a critical mass of people who could be resourceful, resilient, and collaborative, on demand? Okay.
Yeah.
We could really start solving all these issues that we have as a planet, as a society, as families, rather than constantly battling. And so my big goal, and I'd love some help in reaching this because obviously I can't do it. My big goal is, what if we had, let's say, 5 million people who could think that way?
Mm.
Wouldn't that be great? And so that's
Yeah.
my overall goal, is somehow or other get to the point where we've got 5 million people who on demand could be resourceful, resilient, and collaborative, have them leading good lives and be happier and also leading us forward. So we're actually making progress on these issues rather than just battling them out.
Yeah, because everybody would want to know what their secret is.
Yeah. Yes,
And then it would just
exactly.
grow from there, right?
Yep. Yep.
So you mentioned that what you do, you teach teachers and things like that, but can an individual take your courses as well?
Yes, and the courses, they could be used by anybody. The examples that I use, probably 60 or 70% deal with education, but they could be teachers with teachers, teachers with their family, teachers with kids. My website is mindshiftingwithmitch.com. If you went to that, there's a link. You can sign up for the courses. I focused in on teachers partially because I've been in education for a long time, and partially because I just felt, that's really leveraging. It's, if I teach a teacher and that teacher then has 30 students,
Yeah.
there's 30 students who are happier and better able to be co-regulated and better able to self-regulate.
Yeah.
So that's why I focused originally on teachers. I'm thinking, and I'd love to hear back from people. I'm thinking, what if I just led like the equivalent of a book study group in the summer? And
Mm.
so if I took that conflict and collaboration course, which has 8 chapters, or the conflict and collaboration book, which has 8 chapters, and if we did like once a week where we just discussed a chapter and what things that you could try, and then the next week we got together, a couple people about what they tried, and then we discussed the next chapter. Would that be helpful? And I haven't done
Mm.
that, but it's something, if people kind of raised their hand and said, Mitch, something, I'd come to that, then it's
Yeah,
something that I would do.
that'd be awesome. So you told us about your website. Where else can we find you?
I'd say the website, I'm on LinkedIn a lot. I'm on Substack a lot. Just look up Mitch Weisburgh on either of those. I am on Facebook, but I use Facebook a lot for dad jokes. So, uh, so you got to have a bad sense of humor. But if you have a bad sense of humor, you can find me on Facebook. So those are the places most often. Facebook, but LinkedIn and Substack and my newsletter, which is you can access from the mindshiftingwithmitch.com website.
Okay. Well, thanks for joining me today and walking us through this important work, Mitch. This is great.
Well, thank you for having me. Thank you for letting me talk to your listeners, and I hope people got something from this and are able to live happier and more productive lives because of it.
I want to thank Mitchell Weisburgh for joining me today and for bringing his time, experience, and perspective to the show. If something we talked about resonated, all of Mitchell's links are in the show notes so you can explore his work, books, and courses further. And if today made you realize just how long your nervous system has been carrying the load, somatic mindful guided imagery can help you work with what your body has learned, not by reliving the story, but by changing the response at the root. You can learn more at somatichealingjourneys.com. If you're interested in being a guest on Mind Your Own Karma Beyond the Bandage and you bring a lesser known modality or an embodied approach to healing, you can email me at mindyourownkarma@gmail.com with your pitch and links. Thank you for listening today, Karma Crew. As always, take what you need and leave what you don't. And always remember to mind your own karma. I'll see you next time.
Find your own karma, stay in your light. Everyone's fighting their own quiet fight. I found my fire in letting go. Every shadow taught my soul to grow. Take what you need, leave what you don't, and always remember to mind your own karma.